Now, I know you guys have heard of STAR. Have you guys heard of SARB? SARB. All right. This is STAR on steroids, you guys. So now STAR is important, but I got to be honest with you. STAR for me was always tough because once you've explained the situation, to me, the task and the action, there was a pretty blurred line between them, right? I mean, you got the situation, this is what we did, and this was the result. I mean, I always kind of felt like they had to add something in there to make it sound like STAR so people would remember it. But here's SARB, SARB. You still have the situation and you still talk about your actions and you still talk about your result. But here's the game changer. You talk about the benefit, right? You talk about what the result and the solution was in terms of a benefit. Okay, because that's going to be the key. Now, we're going to start talking about stories here, and some of you guys might be thinking, okay, this is all great, but how am I going to have stories that can handle anything that might come at me? So stay tuned because we're going to get to that here in just a second. But let's talk a little bit about the SARBs in general as well. Okay. And because I'm going to tell you in the simplistic of terms, when I interview someone, I want to understand the situation, of course, just like we were just talking about. I'm a CRA that we worked on the phase 3 oncology or colon cancer project. I had 15 plus blah, blah. We had this issue, whatever, because that means that I know you actually did something. Right? Because anybody can say I got 3 years of oncology. Somebody explaining to me a project is a whole different ballgame, right? But what I want to know is what did you accomplish? What was the benefit? Why do I care? That's the key. Why do I care? Everything you tell me needs to matter to me. Why do I care? And that's where the SARB comes into play because it fleshes out the results and it gives you a true benefit. Okay? It gives the facts, but it gives the benefit. Why did the company benefit? Why did the hiring manager benefit? Why did the team benefit? Why does that interviewer care? Okay. All right. So now it's time to play. Get ready. You can come off, mute or you can just chat it in or whatever. So I want you guys to build an SARB story together. Okay. First, I want you to give me a situation that you have dealt with. Ideally, it's something that's already related to a task or accomplishment that's listed on your resume or LinkedIn profile. Just plunk it in the chat or raise your hand once you have them ready. And while I'm waiting for you guys to give them, I'm going to give you some examples. Maybe a sales manager after a merger. The sales department was in chaos. Nobody knew what the focus was anymore. Pipelines were drying up. That's a situation, right? Maybe for site enrollment or recruitment. The oncology study was trailing with only 40% of the target enrollment reached for a phase 3 trial, and we had a tight 3-month deadline. It's a situation. So give me a situation, you guys. Here's one for protocol compliance, audit readiness. An upcoming internal audit revealed that our site's informed consent forms frequently lacked date stamps. It's a situation, right?
Mhm.
Here's one for overcoming operational challenges. Due to a staff turnover during a critical peak period, we had a backlog of 30 plus serious adverse events. This is a situation. Any situations you guys want to share?
Yeah, I had a situation where I was the only data reviewer for this one metastatic colon cancer study, and they had target lesions and non-target lesions, and they were on the same page, which was very confusing. But we had a lot of turnover for CRAs, so they were supposed to give each tumor a unique number. So if you had four targets, they'd be one, two, three, four, and four non-target, they would be five, six, seven, and eight. But when the new CRAs came on, I guess they didn't realize that was in the protocol for the unique numbering, and they would number everybody one, two, three, four, one, two, three, four.
Eek.
And I noticed that, and I said to the senior CRA, it's like, Kelly, what's going on? I said, all the new patients, all the numbering's wrong. And she goes, Mary, I'm so sorry. We've had a lot of turnover. So I said, well, what do you think we should do? I said, we have to query all these to change the number so that they match the protocol. So it turned out I wrote the site initiated discrepancies and I put it in the text that what they had to do and what the protocol said and per ECRF guidelines. So, I sent them to Kelly and then she, emailed them out to all the sites that had these few errors or whatever. And that was one situation I had to do. So,
Okay. So yeah, so that's good. So you have you just described the situation as well as an action that you took.
mhm.
So good, good, good. Anybody else have a situation real quick that you want to thump into the chat or talk about real quickly?
Well, I had lab samples for a study that I came on after the fact started. A lot of samples weren't being collected, and fortunately, it really was occurring at 3 sites of 6. Wasn't all of them, but nonetheless, these were all important samples. And we got to reading all the information between the protocol manual and initiation slides. It was framed within the initiation slides and the manual that you could interpret that samples were maybe optional. And we went back to the sites and said, what's your thought of what was your interpretation of this? And that was it. They considered them optional, and they had problems, and it might have been just a site problem that samples were breaking. So we don't know if the RPMs or the separation process, but that seemed to be more of an internal problem. But we were losing a lot of samples that we needed biomarkers. So we went through, talked to the lab, the central lab to ensure the supplies were proper. The centrifugation was proper based on the instructions. And then we redid all of the materials, manuals, and the training slides, went back out to train both CRAs from the CRO and site members. And then we had an improvement. Um, Sample collection came up drastically, much improved.
Awesome. Yeah, you just gave the SDA and the R. And you guys are kind of getting it, right? So that's exactly what we're looking for there is you gave the situation, you talked about the actions, and then you started briefly talking about the results, right? So real provable numbers where it makes sense. I think you guys are kind of on the right track here, and this is absolutely the point. And you want to make sure a couple of things that I really liked what I heard from both of you guys is that you outlined the situation and you were brief about it. I mean, you gave enough details to show how important it was to what you were trying to do, but you didn't spend too much time on it. And I think what happens a lot of times people get way too much into the weeds, and sometimes it even becomes emotional and gossipy. It's like, oh my God, this coordinator, her kiddo was on drugs and she wasn't coming to work. I mean, it just gets a little out of hand. So you guys were very professional and you explained the situation. You went from there, and then you talked about your actions. One thing that I like that both of you did is you said, I did. Now, there were still a couple of we did this, but when you're in an interview, you want to speak a lot to what you personally did. So it's about what I did. I approached the coordinator. I did this. I pulled the team together and we problem solved a solution. I helped facilitate putting out, the new documentation or the training or whatever. It's not an ego trip, but you've got to show where you were a part of it, even if you were just facilitating or managing other people doing their tasks, because I think that's really key. And I think a lot of times people use the we term, and then I'm like, okay, well, what was your role in this? You got to identify your role in it. Otherwise, were you just a passive observer? We as part of the team. No, I was a part of this. My role in this was this, and being very clear with that. And then the results. And Andy, you very well touched on the results. Where you can use real numbers or metrics, because that helps. Improve the such and such by X percentage is helpful. If you don't have real numbers, you could talk about, doubled the this, or we improved the that, or we were able to eat and meet endpoint markers, or whatever it is, because those are all really key. And so then the last one, and we didn't get to this, but the last one would be the benefit. Now, when you're in an interview, if you're talking about the situation like Andy with your lab situation or Mary where they were having to score, what would be the benefit? Why does the hiring manager want to know this story? Why do you think they care?
Well, it's what you bring then as a result to the team, to the company that you're getting hired for. That better samples, more samples get you to your endpoint much easier and better.
Yeah, more efficient, more effective. So you take that result and then you add the benefit to it, right? So, like for example, if it's a site enrollment issue, okay, well we the result might be that we improved site enrollment by 62%. But the benefit is now a little bit different. First of all, the site was recognized for excellence in enrollment, but the trial was able to move to an analysis phase on schedule, or we were able to accelerate the potential drug approval, right? So nobody has to save the world, but you're recognizing or acknowledging the fact that the result was important, but this was the benefit. The result was that we were able to get all of these labs done. Why? Because we needed that biomarker data in order to be able to get the drug approved. That's the benefit. Right? We were able to see the big picture and we were able to move forward from there. So it's a slight difference, but it's an important one. And here are some examples. And you guys, of course, this will be available on replay too, so that you can see it. But here are some examples that will help you craft your stories. Okay. So for example, situation, the oncology study was trailing with only 40% of the target enrollment reached for a phase 3 trial with a tight 3-month deadline. The action, I developed a new targeted outreach strategy utilizing patient database screening, and I collaborated with specialized oncologists for referrals rather than relying solely on generic clinic referrals. The result is I increased enrollment rate by 62% in 2 months, surpassing the study target, and the benefit, the site was recognized for excellence in enrollment, and the trial moved to the analysis phase on schedule, accelerating potential drug approval. You see how powerful that benefit becomes? The result is powerful in itself, but the benefit is kind of like just the topping. Now they're seeing you as a professional that gets the bigger picture. You're looking at all the stakeholders, right? And like the protocol and compliance example that I've given here, the internal audit that's upcoming, the ICFs weren't done properly. There were all these issues, blah, blah, blah. What did you do? I implemented a dual check system where I, as the lead coordinator, you're identifying your role, right? Reviewed every consent form before the subject left the clinic, and I updated our electronic tracking log to include a quality assurance column where they can check it off, right? The result, I reduced documentation errors from 15% to 3% within 1 month, real numbers. The benefit, the site passed their audit, right? So not only now have I reduced the result, I reduced the documentation error, I'm still looking at the bigger picture. The benefit was that we passed the audits. We improved safety compliance because now I have a process that I'm going to use for every other project that we do. And I ensured patient safety, right? You start talking about this. I reduced the risk of data rejection, et cetera. You're looking at the bigger picture. You're talking about the benefits. Okay, so it's star on steroids. And here are just a couple of more if you guys want to take a look at these. And again, this will be on the replay too. But these are going to be gold to help you build your SARB stories. And one thing I want you to note is you see where I'm using like 42% instead of 40? Be careful of using round numbers. People might think you made stuff up. If you do use a number, make sure it's a number you can quantify. Make sure it's a number that you can point back to. Otherwise, just say improved by, we saw improvement, customer satisfaction went up, or people were happier in their job. If you can't quantify it, don't give a number, but state what the result or the benefits were. But if you can quantify it, actually use a real number rather than rounding it where possible, because that'll grab their attention a little bit better, right? So anyway, so I don't know if this helps as well, but this gives you that extra icing, and that's what's really important. And when we start doing that, and of course, we've just talked about a few examples here, what I want you to do is I want you to go through your resume and I want you to look at some of the accomplishments that you've already started outlining or your resumes or some of the key tasks that you've done and come up with some of the SARB stories, right? Where did you fix a problem? Where did you solve an issue? We're back to your what's now. What problems do you solve? Right? You're a clinical research associate. Your problems are you go out and you monitor, you identify these issues. To Andy's point, maybe it's a retraining issue, maybe it's a process issue, maybe it's a documentation issue, maybe it's a technology system issue, right? What you look at your resume and see what problems you solve on a daily basis in your target role and come up with some SARB stories so that you can articulate them. The situation, your actions, what were the results? And why does the manager care? What is the benefits? And here's where we talked earlier into the webinar is okay, well, how am I going to know what questions they're going to ask me? Here are some in-pocket stories that you can come up with. Come up with an SARB story on that shows your leadership skills. Come up with an SARB story that shows a failure point. Come up with an SARB story that shows your technical skills. You redid a dashboard, you helped to improve a database, you helped to do something technically, right? Come up with an SARB story that shows how you dealt with conflict. Come up with an SARB story that helped you come up with some type of an innovative approach for something. Okay. And this is why it's so important is so if you can come up with these 5 in-pocket stories, it's going to be really, really helpful. And here's just kind of a crypt note. Leadership. I rallied the team during X crisis, right? One of the examples that I used with the in one of the articles that I wrote was about a sales manager. The company had actually gone through a merger, and all the sales professionals, they were like, well, I don't know what to do now. I mean, everything's kind of shifted. The products have changed. I mean, it's a little bit chaotic. And his claim was, I rallied them. I started having a morning huddle. We started identifying what our priorities were for the day. And then, of course, they started talking about the fact that, well, what do we talk about now? It's a new company, it's a new brand, it's a new this. So they retooled some of their scripts. They were able to improve their sales by 20% in the third quarter, just because of morning huddles and retooling their sales scripts. That was it. That's all it took, right? But that showed his leadership because he was able to rally the team to do that, right? It's not complicated. You didn't save the world. You just did a little bit of leadership here and you're showing it through. And it also shows your initiative, right? Failure, budget overrun. I overran a budget, right? And then you improve the process. You guys, out of every story that anyone can tell, probably the most powerful stories that you can come up with and be able to very gracefully articulate are stories on failures, your failures, not other people's, yours. If you do it the right way. The failure stories are good whenever you show. First of all, you articulate the situation from a point of wisdom. And when I say point of wisdom, that means that it's not an emotionally charged situation anymore. So you're not being all mad whenever you're telling the story or hurt or bitter or anything like that. You're just kind of articulating the failure through actual facts. Okay. And then you talk about what you learned from what happened, what actions you took to resolve it, what the results were, and why the hiring manager cares. The failure stories can probably be one of the most powerful stories in your interview arsenal. One of the most powerful. You've just got to remember to tell it from a point of wisdom, talk about what you learned from it, give your actions results and the benefits. Right? Because whenever you can turn it full circle and you show the benefits, you're showing that you as a professional are an ever growing professional and that you're someone that acknowledges the fact that you make mistakes, you hold yourself accountable for them and you grow from them. And the benefit will always be to the company. Very powerful. So failures are really good ones. Technical ones, really simple. This doesn't mean you have to know how to write COBOL or C++. It just means that you built a dashboard. You put together Excel tools for the CRAs. You came up with a better way to track queries, right? You came up with a better way to track whether or not IRB is updated and all this stuff. It's just a technical thing. Conflict, disagreement. We had a disagreement between stakeholders. I was able to get everybody on the same page because we adjusted the solution. Everybody had buy-in. There's your benefit, right? Just real quick stories on these topics. Innovation. We took a new approach. We re-engineered a process. We fixed something, right? We were innovative in doing it. These are your in-pocket stories. You need to come up with an SARB on every single one of these. Have them in your pocket. Have them ready. Stand in front of a mirror and practice them. Don't worry about them being perfect. They can be messy. Because when you're standing in front of a mirror and you're practicing them, they're going to get crisp and clean. They're going to start sounding like Andy, like Umu, like Mary. They're going to sound like Angela, right? When you write it out, it's going to sound cold. But when you start talking it through, it's going to start sounding like you. Repeat it over and over and over again to where it sounds natural. And that's going to be really critical. You're not going to be nervous now. You got answers to almost everything. You come up with these 5 in-pocket stories and a couple of SARBs that speak to your accomplishments. That's going to be 80% of the questions that any interviewer is ever going to ask. I guarantee it. You're not going to have to worry about going in there and not knowing the answer to anything because you've already got the answers. Okay? So as you build your stories, just remember what was going wrong, the situation. What did you do? What changed? What was the result? And why should the hiring manager care? Right? What was broken? What did you do? What changed? Why does the hiring manager care? That simple. Okay? It's not complicated. Before we wrap up and open it up to additional questions, one thing I want to make sure that I really stress here is an interview is supposed to be two-way, just like a first date. It isn't about getting that person to like you and want to date you. It's about you deciding if you want to date them. And it's the same thing in an interview. Which means, and Mary, you're the queen today, right? You went into that interview with questions because you had done your homework. You have to evaluate them too, which means you know all about that company, you know all about their products, you to the extent to where you can, you know who you're going to be speaking with because you've got to be able to go in asking smart questions. And not only will it help you decide whether or not you want to work with them, but it makes them very impressed with you, right? Oh my gosh, she's done her homework. She's confident. She knows what we do. I'm very interested. Mary is the poster child of answering this today because that's exactly the outcome that you will get when you have done that. It shows you did your homework, and it also helps too when you go in and ask questions. It will help you understand what their expectations are, right? So if you're asking specific questions and they're falling flat, then maybe they're not interested in the things that you care about, right? So it kind of helps you from that perspective as well. I will tell you that for some of our clients, not asking questions, good questions, is a deal breaker. They will not move forward with candidates that don't ask good questions during the interview. And this goes back to you going in as a consultant already having the job. If you go into that interview with that mindset of they've already hired me, they might not know it yet, but they've already hired me, and I'm just going to go in and find out a little bit more about the problem they're trying to solve and whether or not I can fix it for them, right? If you go in with that mindset, you're going to have questions. Day one, you're going to have questions, right? And if you're leveraging your research, you can identify 1, 2, 3 questions that you've identified that you know that they're probably having challenges on. If they just launched a large phase 3, you guys have worked large phase 3s, you know what challenges those are supposed to be expecting, right? So, and Andy, really to your point, whenever you were talking about the very generic question they asked about budgets, you've dealt with a lot of budget issues before. So, what questions would you have to flesh out? Okay, what kind of problem were you having with the budget? Knowing those questions, whenever you start looking at the broader picture, what questions are they going to have based off of the season that this company is in right now? And then you can turn them. How are you approaching your budgetary issues? How are you approaching this large phase 3 for this very rare disease? I'm sure patient enrollment has been a beast, right? So you can start looking at those types of things, the bottlenecks in this, and oh, you're using this new EDC program. I've never heard of them before. Are they agile? How are you dealing with that, right? Specifics are going to be a little more, they're going to land better than generics are. Okay. So I get this a lot. Well, what's your company culture like? Somebody Google that. Somebody on Google told you to ask that question. Do you really care what my company culture is? We all work from home. There you go. We have a morning huddle. Yippee. So, I mean, let's start talking about something real. What are we really trying to accomplish here? We're trying to take on the world, right? I mean, what exactly is it that you think they're passionate about? Be specific in your questions based off of the research you've done on the company. And if nothing else, there's a magic question you can ask. And I give this to people. There's a couple of questions. One I'm not putting here, I do in the coaching, but this one is a really good one. And it is, what does success look like in the first 90 days? And this is actually a very powerful question to close on because the interviewer wants to know that you've visualized yourself in this role. They want to know that you want this job. They want to know that you're thinking about what it's going to be like to work there and how you can be successful. And so it is a very powerful question. Here's the other power behind it. It causes the interviewer to mentally visualize you in the role. That is exceptionally powerful. Andy is working on with me day one. I'm doing his onboarding. I'm now considering 90 days from now, what does Andy look like? Andy, in order for you to be successful, see, I have to put you there. I have to put you on my team. I have to have you working side by side with Becky and with Natalie and with Carrie and with all of these people on my team. I have to put you there in that spot. That's powerful for an interviewer to do that. And so this is a really great question to start wrapping up with. And the other great thing too is it exposes priorities. So if the company has other priorities, in order for you to be successful in the first 90 days, I'm going to need you to come up to speed really quickly on this tool that we have in order to blah, 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 blah. Well, you may not have even known that there was a tool like that. And it helps to really identify other priorities that the hiring manager may have that you were not aware of before. And it shows how they're going to measure you. Maybe you're not going to be okay with the way they measure you, but it's going to make it really clear on what they're going to be holding you accountable for. Okay. And then it opens up the door to deeper conversation. This is important too. I had this gal that I was interviewing for one of my recruiter positions, and this was way back in the day. And she asked this question, um, and and she said something along the lines of, "Well, why did you join CRA Resources?" Well, okay, she didn't know that I was a co-founder, so I told her. Well, I used to work for IBM and I gave her a little bit of a brief history on IBM. I was a senior transformation executive whenever I left. I had 17,000 people reporting to me globally through my programs and loved the job. My team would parachute in and we would fix troubled accounts and we had all this really cool stuff going on and just absolutely loved it. But I was working 100-hour weeks. And, the question was, what do I do? Do I keep doing this? Do I get promoted or do I do something else? And I decided that I wanted to start something of my own. And the gentleman that he and I started this company for, he was a VP for his company. So we decided, you know what? Let's just go build something. And so we whiteboarded what we could build. And this was a passion for us, both of us. We wanted to be in this industry and we wanted to be able to place high quality individuals. And so we started this company and I just gave her the whole pitch. With 6 months, we went from red to black because we feel like doing the right thing and blah, blah, blah. This whole passionate litany that I gave her. She goes, "Oh, okay. Well, how long have you been with the company?" I was like, you got to be kidding me here, right? So I just like poured my heart out to you about something that you asked me a question. I gave you a heartfelt answer. Did you even hear what I said? Did you even care? Right? Ask this question. Care about the answer. Let it lead you into a real conversation. It's a first date. Make it matter. Okay. Because that's going to be what fosters that connection. That's going to mean it's not casual, it's a real conversation between two professionals who have very similar desire to accomplish something in this incredible industry.
I just want to add with that magic question. I love that. I think it's an extra way for the company to feel like you care about what you can do for them.
Mhm.
You care about what they need in those 90 days. And it's not, I mean, it is also how can I perform well for you? You know, how are you going to measure my performance in those 90 days? But it's also what's most important to you? What can I do for you in the first 90 days I work for you? It sort of gets you back into that mindset of, you're trying to do them a service. You have these skills, but you're really trying to see what you can do for them and communicate that to the interviewer.
It's a really good point. Mhm. So, in conclusion, now you guys, some of you guys were in the elevator pitch webinar. VIP members, you have full access to those webinars. On our blog site as well, you have the ability to go and grab, if you just go to our blog site, craresources.com/blog, if you just do a search on elevator pitch, there's a whole bunch of elevator pitches out there. And what I love about these is some of them are roundtables. I actually interviewed my team and they give elevator pitches, right? How to ace use them, what they are, and how they break down. Elevator pitches are really powerful, you guys. Um, if you start your interview with the elevator pitch on tell me about myself, should be rehearsed but tailored, not cold rehearsed, but like I was giving you the pitch on how we started this company, right? I mean, it means something, And then, of course, if you have the SARB examples of your accomplishments and the SRB examples of those 5 in pockets, then you close with questions, real smart questions where you're interviewing them. We call it the reverse interview. You've just nailed every interview you will ever have. Okay. And that can be the flow. That puts you more in control of the interview. You're not just sitting there being interrogated by them. It's a two-way conversation. You are the consultant going to a business meeting, finding out what the problem is that they need to solve. And by the way, you're the solution, right? And you've got all the answers right there. Appreciate you guys being here today. If you think of any questions, plunk them into the community. Shoot me an email. We'll get this replay out and maybe I'll see you on Thursday.